And this is the way he began the second document that he wrote. And I'll be unpacking this as I go along through the evening. And I want you to kind of think about, what he's saying here and why, in particular, why did he say it in this way? He said, I am Patrick, a sinner, most uncultivated and least of all the faithful, and despised in the eyes of many. So, as I said, I will let you into the story about how he came to say that about himself as we go through. So I'm going to talk a little bit about his family, just some of the basics. I also do a full presentation on his family because he had lots of family in Ireland. He had sisters, he had nephews, nieces, and possibly some brothers, although it is thought that one of his brothers was killed at the time that Patrick himself was kidnapped and brought to Ireland. So his name wasn't Patrick, he wasn't Irish. His name was Maewyn Succat, and then he got this title Patricius because of the patrician order in Rome. And it's from, and you get that when you are made, if you like, an officer of the church. And that's where the Patrick came from. He was from a wealthy Romano, British Christian missionary family. And he's known as the Apostle of Ireland, and he's the primary patron saint of Ireland, along with Saint Bridget and Saint Columba, or sometimes known as Saint Columkill. His birthplace and birth date are subject to, again, there's you'll find writings out there that differ from what I'm giving you here today, but this is what I believe. You will find some books out there who will say there was never a Patrick at all. There's other books who talk about there being two Patricks, and then other people have different dates. So just to alert you to that, if you're reading any particular, books. For me, the most likely is that he was born around 385 on the west coast of England, probably near Dumbarton in Scotland, although there are a lot of people in Wales who claim, and as you can imagine, there is a lot of money to be made for somebody who can stand up and say, this is definitely the place that St. Patrick came from. So far, no one has ever been able to do that. Despite the fact that in his written work, he tells us where he was from. He mentions it was the village of Banaventa, Barnae. But at the moment, we don't know where that is. Now, his parents were Calpurnius and Conchessa. They were part of the wealthy Romano-British living in Britain, in charge of the colonies, because the Romans had colonized the island of Britain, or in particular, the southern part, which is England, and to some extent parts of Wales, from around midway through the 1st century. His father was a deacon and his grandfather was a priest, so they were, that was part of the job. They also had jobs, collecting taxes and various other important jobs. Now, there's evidence that some of his siblings and their offspring worked alongside him in Ireland. And I'll mention a few. St. Mel of Ardagh, from where the famous Ardagh chalice comes from, and his brothers Melchu, Munis, and Rioch. So they would all have been nephews of Patrick. They accompanied their uncle. The most famous sister is Dorerca. Again, there's a debate here about whether she was a blood sister or whether she was a spiritual sister. So you will read some books who will tell you one and other books, but we don't know for sure. What we do know is that she is known as the Mother of Saints because most of her children, 17 sons and 2 daughters, entered a religious life, and many were later recognized as saints, and several of her sons became bishops. Now, she is honored on the 22nd of March, around this time of the year, and she's the patroness of Valentia Island, which is off the coast of County Kerry. A little bit about St. Mel. We know a lot about the schisms and splits within the church, but one of the early ones was, I suppose, it was a way of life kind of split. The original Christians were, if you like, the salt of the earth, but once the Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, from that stage onwards, the elites were in control of the church, and they brought a new flavor to it. Now there were those who, like Saint Mel, who identified with the with the early years of the church and believed in lots of things that the rich didn't believe in. So he believed in supporting himself through manual labor. He believed that it was wrong to be a burden on people. And he was, part of a section of the church that agreed with that. Now, Patrick appointed him as one of the earliest Irish bishops and head of the Diocese of Ardagh. And Mel was involved in the building there of the monastery. And he was both bishop and abbot, because there was two traditions in Ireland, if you like. There was the monastic tradition as well as the diocesan tradition. And he was the one who accepted St. Bridget's profession as a nun and served as her mentor while she was in Ardagh. Just a quick little segue. In ancient Irish society, women had a lot of rights, and particularly in relation to their wealth. And you were entitled to hold on to whatever you brought into a marriage, as well as a portion then of what was made while you were in the marriage. And up to the time that, it took quite a long time for the church to root out things like divorce and to enforce celibacy. So nuns and priests, often were married. But Bridget was having difficulty, as even in those days, even with the background in Ireland of women having certain rights, she wasn't really welcomed. And the male-dominated church hierarchy, even at that time, did not see a way for allowing women in. But it was Saint Mel who found a way around that, and I'll explain that now in a moment. So a little bit about Mel then. His feast day is February the 7th, and it's observed as a holiday for single people, a day for singles to celebrate the good things about being single. And there are traditions that include sending yourself a St. Mel's Day card, and of course, hosting parties for your single friends. I'll get back to the piece about Mel and Bridget later. So let's have a look at Patrick the slave and how he escaped from slavehood. A lot of this we know from a document that's known as the Confessio, which you can download online anytime you want. So according to this, at the age of 16, now he doesn't tell us it was 403, because I mean there's been many since his time. The calendars that have been updated, from the Julian calendar, which was called after Julius Caesar, then to later calendars, then up to the Gregorian calendar. So the years changed. But what I go along with is that around the year 403, he was captured by Irish, sometimes described as pirates, from his home. Oh, excuse me, on the west coast of Great Britain. And then he was brought to Ireland to serve as a slave, herding and tending sheep in Dalriada. Now, the reason why the Irish were raiding, just think about it this way. Who was in Ireland? Everybody knows there were Celts, but where did they come from? Well, a lot of the Celts that were in Ireland at this stage were people who had been forced out of Europe, because we know that the Celtic Empire was in Europe. So a lot of them had been forced out of Europe as the Roman Empire rose and began to dominate. Because originally the Celtic Empire was much stronger before the Roman Empire emerged. So when the Romans took over Celtic parts of Europe, a lot of the Celts either had to integrate and accept their fate on Rome, or they were either forced out, and some of them would have left. And of course, some of them ended up in Ireland. So they would have known that the last thing that you would want is the Romans to arrive on the coasts of Ireland. So their strategy was very simple. We'll destabilize the western coast of Europe, particularly the western coast of Britain, so that the Romans would be too busy defending their coasts there to ever think of coming and raiding and invading Ireland. So that's really what was happening there. This was a time when they went over to destroy some Roman communities and take away the people that were there back to Ireland as slaves. And we know even from Patrick's writing, we're talking about thousands of people. And he was owned then by a Rí, which is the Irish word for king, Miliach MacBain, and he ruled some hills in County Antrim. Patrick then tells us a little bit about life there. It was so bad, if you like, he began to pray. And in his writings, it tells us that he had never before paid much attention to the teaching of religion. He tells us that he didn't, in his early days, believe in God, and he found priests like his father and grandfather foolish. But anyway, that's where he was there on Slieve Mish. And once again, there's you read other books that would say it wasn't in Antrim that he was, it was in County Mayo. So again, he's a famous man, so there's plenty of people out there trying to put a claim to him. But I believe this is where he was, and most people do. So it's a legendary first known Irish home of St. Patrick. So he worked there as a shepherd for about 6 years, from the ages of 16 to 22. Now, I just ask you to consider one thing at the moment here. 16 to 22 is the years, they're the formative years in education. They're your high school years and your college years. Now, if you were a rich member of the Roman community, you were going to be getting education, a lot of education. A lot of people don't understand, the system of education as it, would have been, almost 2,000 years ago. This was going to become a problem for him later on then, having missed out on his high school and on his college education. He lacked some of the basic skills required for promotion and even for membership of the church hierarchy. And this was something that was going to haunt him throughout the rest of his life. So he endured 6 years of loneliness, and any of you have ever been up to Antrim, you know the cold, damp weather, the isolation. And then we're told that on his last night, he received in his sleep his first otherworldly experience. A mysterious voice said to him, "Your hungers are rewarded, you are going home." And he walked 200 miles to a place. Now, in the 6th and 7th century, there were a number of biographies written by Patrick, and a number of those were attempts to create an origin story for the arrival of Christianity and for the Christianization of Ireland. So people believe that there was a need, of course, for a central character, and Patrick was picked because he was sent from Rome. Now, the otherworldly experience, well, if you're living in the cold weather and damp, you're going to have otherworldly experience. Part of the church narrative, he talks about, God visiting him in his sleep and things like that. If you believe that, that's fine. But, the reality is that at that time, a major event happened in Irish history, and that was the assassination of the High King, Niall of the Nine Hostages. Now, Niall was the king, and it was his sailors that would have kidnapped Patrick. And now, when Niall was assassinated, at this stage, Niall was one of the foremost leaders and warriors within Europe, not just in Ireland. And he was on a campaign against the Romans. Somewhere in the Alps, he was assassinated. And he was assassinated by an Irishman. I haven't got time to go into the details of that. But again, this was completely unexpected. So it threw Ireland into turmoil, political turmoil, anguish, all sorts of things that would have destabilized Ireland. And I believe that what happened was Patrick was able to take advantage of this crisis to find a way to get out. Also, he would have had some help. It would have been very difficult for an escaped slave to go there. And it's quite likely that in Ireland at the time that you would have had something like the equivalent of the Underground Railroad for slaves. We know, for instance, that when people were brought to Ireland as slaves, that if they were from a wealthy family, somebody would have been sent to Ireland to negotiate a ransom. So there were people who were in the business of negotiating and making contacts. So it's quite likely there was a network in Ireland, and somehow he was able to take advantage of that. What he tells us that he says, I came in God's strength and had nothing to fear. But it's hard to know. We know that in his documents that there's definitely parts of them, from the way it's worded and from the meanings, from the structure, that it likely came from Patrick, like the sentence on the first slide that I gave you. But there's other parts that look like, they were a part of a narrative that was developed. And at that time in Ireland and throughout the world, if you wanted to build an origin story, you had to, your framework was the Old Testament. So you had to include all sorts of things that were common throughout the Old Testament. So you had to have leading figures, you had to have miracles, you had to have all sorts of strange things happening. And that's literally what happened. Significantly, though, when he was in Ireland, he became fluent, or certainly became well versed in the Irish language. He learned of the Irish culture and history and developed an affinity towards the people of Ireland. And it is more than likely, it was this, if you like, connection with Ireland that allowed him eventually to force the church authorities to send him to Ireland. So he left Ireland on a boat carrying a cargo of Irish hounds that were for sale on the continent. He tells us that he approached the captain and he was turned away. He was worried that he was going to be apprehended, and he wanted to get away, because at that stage it would have been a serious crime for the captain to take him on board, to give him a job. And also he himself could be apprehended because he was a runaway slave. But apparently what likely happened was that he managed to talk to them long enough to tell them about his skills with animals, because he'd been a shepherd for 6 years. And if any of you know anything about sheep, you cannot be a shepherd without having a good dog and a good trained dog. So he may have had some skills that they felt would be useful. So he tells us himself that they said, come on board, we'll take you in trust. He also tells us to travel for 3 days. Significantly then, and this is important for the rest of our story here, what they found was devastation. Now, the devastation was probably the result of hundreds of thousands of pagan Germanic peoples who were fleeing the Huns, and they crossed the River Rhine. Occasionally, in really bad winters, the Rhine would freeze over. So now they were able to get across the river, and they invaded Gaul. Now, Gaul at this stage was Christianized, as was Britain. So significantly then, when he arrived, he tells us he found a wilderness, he found devastation, which means that a lot of these people who were Christians were forced out. We know some of them, ended up in the Middle East. We know that there's they traveled lots of places, but some of them would have ended up in Ireland. So, and that's important as well in understanding why Patrick was sent to Ireland, because these people fleeing Gaul would have been Christians. Now, Patrick tells us he walked for 2 weeks, found nothing to eat. He tells us that he was taunted. How about it, Christian? You say your God is all powerful. And then Patrick says he turned to them and said, from the bottom of your heart, turn trustingly to the Lord, my God, for nothing is impossible to him. And the sailors bowed their heads in supplication. And just then they heard a stampede of a herd of pigs. So they were able to get some of the pigs, feed themselves, and of course the dogs, because there was no way, no matter whether they were to die of hunger themselves, there was no way they were going to kill and eat one of those dogs, because those dogs were worth more than any of the men. You all know about the story about Patrick and the snakes. Now, we know that there was never any snakes in Ireland, at least this side of the last ice age. So this is what I believe happened. We know, and Patrick, because we know that Patrick eventually arrived back to England, because he tells us that. He would have 2 choices at this stage when he left the group after traveling across France. He could have turned around and headed back through that devastated territory, which wouldn't have been a good thing to do, or he would have went around the coast. And on the coast, there would have been fishing villages. There would have been opportunities for him to get on board a boat that might bring him back. But other things happened as well. And one of the things that's significant is that around that time, there was an abbot, Honoratus, and he was constructing a monastery on the island of Lerins, which is modern day Cannes, where they have the film festival. Now, the reason he'd been able to get this land was because no one else wanted it, because it was uninhabitable. It was full of snakes. There's a book written about it by one called Hamilton, and she wrote, Honoratus was winning a reputation for driving its booming population of vipers into the sea. She writes then in her book that it is not impossible or unreasonable to assume that he, Patrick, might have sought refuge on the island. So I think that probably what happened was that Patrick found work there, stayed there for a year or so before he headed back to Britain. And probably eventually when he was in Ireland, at the end of a day's work with his entourage, they would be sitting around and they would actually be talking. They wouldn't be on their cell phones and they would be swapping stories. And probably one of his stories would have been about how he managed to get rid of all these snakes or help get rid of all these snakes on the island. And as we know, stories tend to take on a life of their own, and possibly there may have been some convenient, way for explaining the getting rid of pagans or whatever. But there's probably a real story in there, and if there is a real story, I bet it's got to do with his time at Lerins. Now we know he got back, and his parents obviously were very welcome. They didn't want him to leave, but at this stage, he said he had discovered God, and he began to work towards a future in the church, because his experience up to now, he says, had changed his life forever. So again, he had another one of these otherworldly experiences, and this is the way it's described to us, and it's often referred to as the voice of the Irish. And he tells us that in his dreams, he saw a man coming, as it were, from Ireland. His name was Vic Torricus, and we know there was a real person there, and he carried many letters, and he gave me one of them, and I read the heading, The Voice of the Irish. As I began the letter, I imagined in that moment that I heard the voice of those very people who were near the wood of Vaucluse, which is beside the Western Sea, and they cried out as with one voice, we appeal to you, holy servant boy, to come and walk among us. So that's used in the narrative to explain, if you like, his desire and motivation for wanting to come to Ireland. So now let's delve a little bit deeper into the history of Christianity on Ireland. The Roman Catholic Church didn't come to Ireland, obviously, till in terms of their own history. They tell us that it arrived with Patrick. But what they do also tell us is that there were never any Christians in Ireland before that, which is not right. It's not true. What you have is when the Roman Empire, if you like, adopted Christianity as the sole religion of the Roman Empire, any of the Christian groups, and there were many, all over Europe, any of them that didn't agree to the leadership of Rome, they were excommunicated. They were labeled as heretics, had their properties removed, and whatever rights they had to practice removed. So Christians who were in Ireland before Rome then were, if you like, deemed to be heretics. So that's why if you ask, and I've done even asked historians within the Catholic Church in Ireland, they just simply deny that there was ever any Christians. If you press them hard enough, they might be prepared to say, oh, well, yeah, maybe there were people who called themselves Christians, but they weren't. So how do we know that there were? Well, there's plenty of evidence from folklore, from written work, and tradition that tells us various stories. We know that in some of the writings that St. James visited Ireland in the 1st century. When he left behind an organization that was led by his father, Zebedee. And if you go around Dublin today, there's still people who talk about Zebedee. Now, early, and this is important now, because the early Irish Christianity was from the teachings of St. John. And he spread the word of Christ originally to Africa and Asia. And it was that connection to Ireland, not Rome. Now, some practices then differed. And the two big ones were the dating of Easter. and also the tonsure. Now, the tonsure is the haircut. So those two in Ireland, even though Patrick, came and tried to enforce the Roman way on this, it wasn't for another 3 to 4 centuries that the dating of Easter was accepted in Ireland, and that the dating of Rome was accepted. So it took quite a while. Now, there's Irish legends and annals. We know of a very important king in Ireland was Cormac MacNessa, and he was alive at the time of Christ. Now, the story is that on Calvary, where Jesus was crucified, the Romans brought out a representative of every nation that were there so that they could witness because they knew this was a big event, even at that time. One of the people that was there was a commander of MacNessa's forces. We're not sure what he was doing there at the time, but he was brought out as a representative of the Gaelic countries. Now, he came back to Ireland at some stage later, and he recounted the story to Cormac MacNessa. And Cormac MacNessa got very, very upset when he heard what had happened, and he got up, he started ranting and raving. The problem was, of course, Cormac at some point in his life had some shrapnel embedded in his skull. And with this ranting and raving, he got a tear in his brain, and he died from a bleed. And we know that from lots of stories. Short while later, a couple of hundred years later, literally about 300 years later, one of the most important high kings of Ireland, Cormac MacArt. And now he died in 366, and it is said that what happened to him was that he converted to Christianity, and the Druids then decided to kill him because they wanted to stop the spread of Christianity. They're just some of the examples that we have that are there about Christians being in Ireland and Christian tradition being in Ireland before Patrick. The other thing, of course, is what are the most famous names for boys in Ireland? Well, Sean and Seamus. And that's Sean is John and Seamus is James. So they were the two people that I talked to, John and James, not Peter and Paul. Now, there were other Irish disciples in Ireland when Patrick arrived, and we know of them. We know them, they're celebrated, and there's places called after them, and they're saints, Albi, Declan, Kieran, Ibarus. They operated in the south of Ireland. Patrick had issues at the time because he wasn't welcomed by them. They did not want somebody from the outside coming in and declaring that to be the leader of the church. So Patrick was restricted to his efforts to the northern half of Ireland. And if he wanted to go south, it had to be by special invitation from somebody there, and also with permission then from the local Christian leaders. Now, as I said earlier, one of the issues in Ireland was Rome, and Rome getting a foothold in Ireland. So if you can just imagine it yourself, they'd already spent hundreds of years trying to make sure that the Roman army never got in. Now you have somebody coming from Rome, Patrick, and you had a tradition coming into the country that wanted to change everything. It wanted to turn all of the people who adhered to the pagan beliefs into Christians. So for a lot of people, that was a threat, and as such, it was an existential threat for pagans, for paganism. So so there were lots of reasons why the Irish would be wary, of anything arriving in Ireland that had any connection with Rome. Now let's have a look at the Roman influence. Well, we know that Christians were persecuted, for the first 300 years. And particularly from 250 up to around the early years of the 4th century, the persecution was it was empire-wide. Now, what happened then was Constantine became emperor of Rome, and he decriminalized Christianity first of all, and then eventually over that century, through his early work, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So let's see what happened. Well, Constantine was based in Britain, and Britain was Christian. And it was occasionally what happened was that in areas, in outlying areas, soldiers would declare their leader to be emperor. Now, some of this was, if you like, a response to poor leadership in Rome itself. So sometimes the soldiers didn't like the orders that were being given, the tasks that were being given by what they saw as people who never risked their life for a day, who sat around drinking and eating all the time. So in this case, they decided that Constantine was going to be emperor. So for that to happen, Constantine then had to get to Rome, and he had to remove the incumbents, and he had to deal with anybody else who felt that they had a right to that. So he had to raise an army. And here's what I believe happened, that to get an army big enough for the job, he had to promise the Christians in Britain and in the other Christian areas of Gaul that if they joined him and they were successful, that he would end the persecution of Christians. Because up to this stage, Christians had been refusing to get involved in wars. In the early years, Christians did not believe, again, the first commandment, thou shalt not kill. So they did not believe in getting involved in wars. And they refused, for instance, to get involved and support the Jews in the war with Rome. And so something happened here anyway. So Constantine then, with his army, who were Christians, we know that because they all went into battle with their swords painted in with Christian symbols. And so he won, and he decriminalized them. And then Emperor Theodosius I in 380 then made the official religion, made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. So just look at the time scale. That was 380. 6 years later, then St. Patrick was born. Now, when Patrick was a young man, in fact, he'd been in Ireland, and by 410 he was probably at that in a place we call Cannes today, drawing out snakes. But during that year, Germanic forces sacked Rome, and at that stage, the Roman soldiers were withdrawn from Britain. And that was for the last time. There had been times before when the Roman soldiers had been recalled to fight various, boundary and wars, and returned to Britain, but this time they didn't. And then in 476, Odoacer, he forced Romulus Augustus, who was the last of the Western Roman emperors, to abdicate. So in this period here, we're seeing, while Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire was in terminal decline. And one of the big battles over the 4th century was, a lot of people believed that the reason why the empire was in decline was because of the influence of Christianity. And so there was a final battle in, I think it was the year 394, between the forces of paganism and Christianity, and the Christians won that. And that's how Christianity survived and spread out of Rome. Now, it was in 380, the Edict of Thessalonica, it made Nicene Christianity the state church of the Roman Empire. Now, they called it Nicene Christianity after the Synod of Nicene, which had been called in the year 325. And this was the attempt by the Emperor Constantine to unify all of the churches. They agreed on the credo, the I believe. That was the main, if you like, outcome from that. The other one, of course, was the expulsion of many Christians who had different beliefs on a whole range of issues. Everything, from original sin to, well, I won't go through them all here, but there were many things that they disagreed on. But anyone who didn't go along with the Nicene Christianity were deemed to be heretics, and heretics were seen as being even worse than pagans. The term Catholic then became in because it just simply means universal, and that was associated by the emperor. And that provided then the impetus for church leaders in Rome to assert their dominance over the various branches of the church around the world. significant date in terms of where I'm going with this for the rest of the day was in 429. The Pope sent Saint Germanus to Britain to ensure compliance with Roman authority. The it was still in the kind of early years, and there was a lot of doctrinal and other differences going on. So he was sent over, and what happened was he got the majority of the church leaders there to go along and accept the orthodoxy of Rome, but that meant that those who didn't were expelled. Where did they go to? Well, many of them went to Ireland. Also, one of the quid pro quos then was that if anything was going to happen in Ireland, it had to be approved by the bishops in Britain first. So from what I've told you before, we've seen a number of things. We know that the slaves that were being captured and brought to Ireland, many of those were Christians. This group of Christians who were expelled from England obviously were Christians. Then there was the people from Gaul who had been removed from their territories as the Germanic pagan tribes came in. So you would have a mishmash in Ireland of different traditions, Christian traditions. So also on top of those, you would have had Irish mercenary soldiers fighting for and against Rome. May have converted while they were away, and may have come back with families or spouses that were Christians. Traders and other free Irish people had converted through contacts, and then of course there was the work of the missionaries that I referred to earlier on, and then we had all these refugees and asylum seekers following the invasion of Gaul and the migration then of the Germanic peoples to that area. So you can see there's a mix, and that mix was seen as potent in the sense that if it wasn't taken in hand, it could lead to, if you like, another independent Christian tradition developing. So that's the kind of background to why the Pope decided to send somebody to Ireland, and why Patrick ended up in Ireland. It was to come in and try to create a situation where all of these Christian peoples who had come from different backgrounds would all accept the leadership and authority of Rome. So let's then have a look at how he converted people in Ireland. He says a couple of things. He says, daily I'm expected to be slain or set upon or reduced to slavery, because it was not going to be an easy task. He knew that. Then Cardinal Cushing in one of his works tells us a little bit, and this kind of highlights what I've been saying to you up to now. He says, it was in an era of alarming crisis that Pope Celestine I sent Patrick to Ireland, an era of confusion and disorder and chaos. Now, a year before Patrick arrived, he sent Palladius. Palladius's mission failed, and Patrick was sent to replace him. His primary role was to align the Christian community in Ireland with Rome. He was sent to Ireland in terms of the Christian narrative, the church narrative in Ireland. They use the word strengthen. He was sent to strengthen the local Christian community. And as I said, the community was a mix in Ireland at this stage. So Patrick had a lot of preparation to do. And he spent about 20 years preparing for a missionary role in the church. Because of his education, remember earlier on, we said from 16 to 22, he had been out running after sheep and doing work on the hills rather than studying. So because of that, he was initially confined to a role as a brother due to his lack of education. They didn't want to make him a priest. Now, he was finally made a priest and then made a bishop as he successfully pleaded his case to be sent to Ireland. The reality there was what it looks like is that if you think about it, who in the right mind would want to go into an Ireland where there was no easy escape from, where there was horrible stories about people who lived in Ireland. So it was not a task that a lot of people would want. One of the reasons why Palladius's mission failed was because Palladius was a man of leisure. He wasn't used to, if you like, walking around in the kind of weather that you get in Ireland and the muck and there's a film out there that was made in 1999 about St. Patrick, and there's a very good scene in it, where they show the arrival of Palladius, and he was decked out in all this fine gear, and he had to walk up through all of this muck, and you could see this was not for him. But anyway, Patrick, I believe, managed to convince, and he was given the job essentially because he was the only man who would do the job, and nobody else wanted to do it. Now he had to get, because of the work that had been done in a couple of years before by Saint Germanus, now he had to get the approval of the British ecclesiastical authorities. Now they did not favour his promotion for a whole load of reasons. One of them being his lack of education. They didn't see him as being fit. But again, there was little that the ecclesiastical authorities could do. Roman made the decision. They had to rubber stamp it. That was really all that happened there. Now, Cardinal Cushing tells a little bit about Patrick's retinue. So when he arrived in the community, he brought with him never less than 24 people, and often up to 100 or more. And typically the group included an assistant bishop, a chaplain, several young men who were preparing for the priesthood, a brehon or judge, because a brehon is just the Irish word for judge, to advise him on legal matters, builders, masons, smiths, metalworkers, chariot and wagon drivers, a cook, a brewer, 2 table attendants, a sacristan, embroidery workers, a palmist. So the usual that you would need, for a community. We think he may have supplemented his church resources with some personal and family wealth, because his family were wealthy. But what we do know is that wealthy Irish nobility, particularly women, provided resources for his work. Now, there's a couple of books out there that you can read. One, you may have come across it before, like Cal. It's the book titled How the Irish Saved Civilization. So his take on Patrick, he said, because of his knowledge of the Irish language and culture, he was sent to provide support to the Christian slaves and converts, starting in Northern Ireland. And when we talk about Northern Ireland there, at that time, it's more the north of Ireland, because the historic division in Ireland between north and south was a line between Dublin and Galway, right across the middle, the shortest distance across the country. And it also was on a naturally formed road that was formed at the end of the last ice age. So you have to stay north of that line. And he would have had to get permission then from local kings to minister to Christians in a given area. You had to go by the protocols in the area, and he would have learned those while he was in Ireland as a slave. And then he would have sought assistance of local kings then to move beyond tribal borders. And he converted some kings as he went along. And of course, that made his work easier. Another book by a guy called Freeman suggests that Patrick succeeded by using a slow and steady approach with a careful eye on the practical politics of Irish society. And one of those, Patrick himself tells us, was making payments to local kings to gain their favor and protection. This again was going to be a big issue in later life, because the ecclesiastical authorities in Britain did not support this, partly because from their point of view, this money should have been coming back to them, and they weren't happy about that. And as a result, they began to kind of talk about the mission in Ireland as Patrick's Christianity, because as far as they were concerned, he was doing it on his own. Now, what is clear, though, is that he chose not to be confrontational or dogmatic. And most importantly, he wanted to demonstrate Christian morality and principles in the way that he himself approached his work. So again, he had to walk the talk. Now, it is understood that Patrick, along with other missionaries, managed to spread Christianity across the country. They did that through preaching, writing, and performing countless baptisms. Now, what was helpful was that the pagan religions were already, had elements of transcendentalism in it, which made it easy for him to explain what the Christian religion was about. And also, he was able to sell it on the basis of things like there will be no longer any need for human sacrifice. Jesus Christ died on the cross, and after that, we don't anymore need human sacrifice, and that would have been very appealing, particularly to those classes of people who might have been ones subject to being taken up for a human sacrifice. And of course, freedom of slaves, and also his relationship with women more than the Roman relationship to women. So the two main groups that were interested at the time in Ireland were the Irish women of the nobility and, of course, slaves. Patrick's Celtic cross, he's renowned for coming up with the Celtic cross, and it combined native sun worshipping with that of the Christian cross. And that's the kind of, the transition, if you like. So rather than coming in and saying that you have to change your beliefs overnight, we're going to force this upon you, it was a gradual thing. And, he adopted much of the pagan ways and also the personnel. The old pagan priests, for instance, they became priests of the church. And he wasn't able to establish a diocesan network along the Roman lines because the clan system in Ireland was so structured that he had to essentially, if you like, build a church within each clan area. And all the hereditary positions that were there continued. So, for instance, the pagan priests became priests of the church. And one of the main reasons why it took so long to get rid of, to introduce and get people to accept celibacy was, think about it, how can you have hereditary positions if there's celibacy? And of course, the obverse is true as well. One of the reasons why the Roman Church introduced and insisted upon celibacy was to get rid of these hereditary rights. So his achievements, he established bishops throughout Northern Central. Somebody there, if you can you can all have a look and see whose phone, whose microphone is on. So he structured the church then by locating bishops close to the site of the king. And then the borders of dioceses, they were arranged to correspond then with the boundary. So he was the highest ranked. I'm just going to go in here for a moment, folks, to see if I can find out which one I have.
It's Shirley, Sean.
Okay, and just muting everybody again there, so that should sort that out. Okay, and he made Latin the ecclesiastical language of Ireland. Now, one of the significant achievements to some extent was that there were no church martyrs from the time, indicating that the pagan rulers allowed him to carry out his mission. Although it wasn't as simple as that, because there were plenty of attempts to kill him, and some of his group were killed, including his chief chariot driver. But there was no major, if you like, missionaries killed, which is unusual because usually the origin story of most religions is based around martyrdom. Another book by Hansen, and those of you who are interested in getting a copy of the presentation, just let me know at the end. And there is a bibliography of these books that I'm referring to. We know then that he in his Confessio, it says, for more than one occasion, he alludes to persecution, and he declares that he expects martyrdom. And of course, he welcomes the prospect. And in those early days in Christianity, people did welcome and invited martyrdom, because the one thing that they believed was that if you died a martyr, you went straight to heaven. Any other way, there was always the possibility that you had just committed some sin and you mightn't get there. But if you were martyred, it was a first-class ticket all the way. Now, by the time of his death, despite some of the narratives that you will read, he hadn't he had not succeeded in converting the whole of Ireland, nor in entirely reconciling the secular authorities to Christianity. And how could he? It was only 25 years. So, as I said, he supported the church. And one of the things that came out of it, because there were a lot of good things that came out of it over the years, in the 6th century, the church laws, and again, at this stage, the Celtic Church or the Irish Church or Patrick's Church as such had developed. They laid down a code of conduct for Christians towards their pagan neighbors. And this was based, again, upon tolerance, acceptance, and most importantly, if you want to convert pagans to your religion, you have to demonstrate in your everyday life the superiority of your beliefs and your way of life. So that was very important. So Cardinal Cushing, within 25 years, the whole island was Catholic, which that's not accepted today. But the other parts are. He consecrated 350 bishops, ordained over 5,000 priests, and built more than 700 churches. Now, can you imagine the impact, the economic impact that all of this had? Also, as a result of all of these people arriving in Ireland because of the devastation that was going on the mainland of Europe, a lot of these asylum seekers were coming and refugees were coming with skills, they were coming with wealth, and they were investing. And the main reason why Ireland had its renaissance, because we know that for 3 centuries after this, Ireland was known as the island of saints and scholars, and then really up to the time that the Vikings arrived. And also the population of Ireland was at its highest in the 5th and 6th century, and wasn't surpassed again until the 18th century. So there was a lot of people came into Ireland and a lot of work. And as you can see, built 700, even though there were probably small churches at the time and hadn't got the grandeur of what you have today, still there was a lot of work. Now I'm going to introduce you to some of the writings. There's 2 writings. The first one is, and this is the one that got him into a lot of trouble. It was a letter to the soldiers of Caradocus. Now, Caradocus was a Christian king on the island of Britain. What happened was Patrick had just been up on the northeastern coast of Ireland and had just been with a community and had baptized them all and made them all Christians. And then he had headed off to his next location. Now, shortly after he left, Caradocus and his soldiers arrived and went into the community and kidnapped and took away the people that he had just made Christian, took them away to the slave markets. So somebody managed to escape and catch up with Patrick and told him the news. So he had to do something about it, because even at this stage, there was still, he was still in the early years, if you like, of the work that he had to do. He knew that there were a lot of people kind of just waiting to see him fall literally on his face, that at some point or other, that he would make a mistake or that he would do something that would destroy the basis of the mission that was there. So he knew and he realized that this was going to be a real test for him. He had to do something and he had to be seen to do something. So he wrote this letter, and Freeman describes the letter as at once a degree of excommunication, because he was calling for the excommunication of Caradocus. And the reality in society at that stage was Christian soldiers would not fight for a non-Christian leader. So if their leader was excommunicated, well, then they couldn't fight for him. So Patrick was looking for him to be excommunicated. It was also a heartfelt plea because he wanted those people to be returned. It was a carefully argued sermon, a word of comfort to his Irish followers, because he knew that his Irish followers were looking to him for leadership and wanted him to get something done. And of course, it was also seen as a powerful prayer to God for divine justice. Copies were sent not just to Caradocus, but to church leaders in Britain and fellow Christians in Ireland. Now, the main problem with this, of course, was he went against protocol. The protocol at the time would have required him to contact the church authorities in the area where Caradocus operated from and get them to deal with it. But Patrick's reasoning was, there's very little time. In a couple of weeks, these people will have arrived on the slave markets in Europe and could be on their way to China or God knows where. So he knew he had a very limited amount of time, and he knew that to try to activate and get people involved would take too long. So he had to do something himself. Um, so, and he realized as well that his own mission was an existential threat if he was seen to just stand by and do nothing. Now, the church authorities in England went apoplectic. The idea that Patrick could take on to approach one of their kings on his own, that was unheard of. Also, Patrick realized that the likelihood was that the priests and the bishops in this area probably relied upon Caroticus for their own personal security. So we don't know what happened to the people as a result of this, but what we do know is that the church from then on, the ecclesiastical authorities in Britain wanted to essentially remove Patrick. And they tried all sorts of things to do that. Now, the Confessio, which is his second work, what happened was eventually they called Patrick to England for a review. And we all know what a review is. So Patrick knew that if he did go to England for the review, they would never let him back. So he refused to go, and he wrote this letter that we refer to as the Confessio. Now, the original document didn't have a title. The name that we give it today comes from the final line in the letter, in which he writes that the letter is his confession, if you like, before death, because he was in his early 70s at this stage. So again, he wrote the Confessio because the church were angry over his letter to the soldiers. He was called back for a review. His character and work were under continuous attack. He was accused of corruption, of having ulterior motives in coming to Ireland in the first place, was stated to be unfit for the job primarily because of his education. And of course, now was getting even worse. He'd basically gone native. So they were saying he was too close to the Irish. And they were using phrases like filthy little pig keeper to describe him. So the Confessio, then, it's a selective story, and it's designed to show that he was chosen by the grace of God to serve selflessly among the Irish. He went through his boyhood, his slavery, his escape, dreams, threats, temptations, everything. All were included to convince the readers that he, like the Apostle Paul, was selected by God and guided by him in his work. So this is his own words, and this is, I believe, was likely written by Patrick. I don't believe anyone could make this up. So I'll read this carefully and I'll explain the relevance of parts. So he says, "Listen to me well, all of you, great and small, everyone who has any fear of God, especially you wealthy landowners, so proud of your education." So that was his first dig at them. Listen and consider carefully. God chose foolish little me from among all of you who seem so wise and so expert in the law and so powerful in your eloquence. He picked ignorant Patrick ahead of all of you, even though I am not worthy. He picked me to go forth with fear and reverence. And without any of you complaining at the time, and what he was saying there was, you didn't complain at the time because you didn't, first of all, think that I would survive any more than a couple of days, and I'd probably end up dead. But certainly you could not in your wildest dreams have imagined how successful I would have been. And so he says, serve the Irish faithfully. So he died a place called Saul, which is in a place called Downpatrick. Now, it wasn't Downpatrick at the time. It became known as that in the 12th century. And he's said to be buried alongside St. Bridget and St. Columba. So I'm just going to quickly go through just a couple of things because I've gone over my time here. I don't want to keep you too long. Just about St. Patrick's Day celebration. So his legacy, as we know, lives on. So we know every year in Ireland, people go on pilgrimage to Croagh Patrick. It used to be called Eagle Mountain or Cruachan Agla, but then it was renamed after Patrick. And every year, thousands of Christians make the ascent. Now, celebrations for Patrick began in the 9th century. Now, at this stage, the Vikings had arrived and had, taken aim at Christianity and had destroyed a lot of the Christian communities in Ireland, broken them up, destroyed them, burnt them, taken the people and the priests and everything away as slaves. Some of them escaped to the continent. And they arrived in Europe then as refugees and asylum seekers. And then Patrick became a symbol for all of those in exiles. So again, the Vikings invaded, and they quickly discovered that the wealth was held in community settlement, Christian settlements. They also realized that people gather together at various times of the year, like St. Patrick's Day, like St. Bridget's Day, and that was a great day for them to go and come away with literally thousands of slaves, and they did that. Because at one time, Dublin was the leading slave market in Western Europe, and then the other one, the leading one in the East, was in modern-day Ukraine. So many Christians left Ireland for the relative safety of Ireland, and then an annual tradition sprung up. And in the 9th century in Ireland, there was an annual 3-day observance of the anniversary of the death of St. Patrick. Then that continued. Now, his feast day was placed on the universal liturgical calendar, and that was done after the work of Luke Wadding in the early 1600s. And then Patrick's Day became a holy day of obligation for Roman Catholics in Ireland. Now, it's also a feast day in the Church of Ireland, which is part of the worldwide Anglican community, because obviously St. Patrick was around before the Reformation. So up to the 1700s, St. Patrick's Day was celebrated predominantly in Ireland. And then from the 18th century onward, as a result of the penal laws, some Irish people began to use St. Patrick's Day as a means of promoting Irish culture and tradition. And they did so as an act of defiance. They would wear, shamrocks and green, because by this stage, green had become the color of St. Patrick. Originally, it was blue. And because other Christians in Ireland who were members of the Anglican community claimed St. Patrick, they were celebrating St. Patrick. So the Catholics then were able to come out, and there was really nothing that the establishment could do about it, because they were celebrating. So the Irish and the Irish Catholics came out then, and basically it was an act of defiance. Just going to quickly go through some of these. And for instance, in St. Patrick's Day in 1916, the Irish Volunteers, they held parades throughout Ireland. And again, this was, if you like, another act of defiance. And the authorities, and this was just only weeks before the Rising in 1916, and the authorities recorded 38 St. Patrick's Day parades. And almost half of them were said to be armed. So in the US then, the story begins really in Florida. The world's first recorded St. Patrick's Day celebration was in St. Augustine, Florida. Now, this was only uncovered recently in research that was done in 2017. And he discovered the first St. Patrick's Day parade was also held there. And both were organized by the Spanish colony's Irish vicar, a guy called Ricardo Artur, or Richard Arthur. Now, many believe that the first meeting of Irishmen on American soil to honor St. Patrick took place in Boston. And Boston then had its first parade in 1812. And the first celebration in New York was held at the Crown and Thistle Tavern in 1756. Now, this was a parade of, in 1762, soldiers serving with the British Army marched through Manhattan to a local tavern. And then the Siege of Boston, or Evacuation Day, during that day, Washington's general orders for the day set the password and countersign for safe re-entry into the city of Boston and St. Patrick, respectively. And then George Washington, he allowed his troops a holiday on March the 17th, and that became known as the St. Patrick's Day Encampment of 1780. And as we know, it spread, throughout the states. Now, St. Patrick had a crozier known as the An Bachal Isa, which translates into the staff of Jesus. Now, there is a claim that he had been given this as a gift when he was when he was in the Middle East at some point in his life, and that it was given to him something that had belonged to Jesus, but we don't know. What we do know is that it was a symbol of Patrick's authority, and it was held in high esteem, and he had an elaborate casing made for it by his companion, the goldsmith Saint Tussock. And it was described by the famous Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. It was covered with gold and adorned with the most costly gems. It was a national relic, and as such, oaths and treaties were signed on it. And it survived storms, invasions, but with the Reformation, it was tragically and sacrilegiously destroyed during Henry VIII's reign. It was taken out from where it was in Christ Church Cathedral, and it was burnt on the street outside. Now, the only nation outside of Ireland that celebrates St. Patrick's Day as a national holiday is Montserrat. It's nicknamed the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean because of its physical shape, resembles Ireland, and also its Irish heritage. So I'm going to finish there. I just want to introduce you to my classes. I do regular online classes. Each class involves 4 lectures for a month. I try to do them on a calendar month basis. So the ones I'm doing at the moment in April, starting on the 6th, is the history of County Offaly, and I'm then going to introduce people to the history of the Republic of Ireland from 1998 up to the current day. Now, they're all presented live on Zoom. There's a course fee of 90. They're also available as recordings with all the materials. Then next month in May, I do the history of County Laois, and then the 6 counties are Northern Ireland for the same period, 1998 to, that should be 2023. So I'll go back now and I'll take any questions that you may have. I just run through these here. There is links here for movies. There's kids movies. This is the bibliography.